and welcome once again to another episode of The Dark Place. And this is a podcast or radio show that delves into the most captivating and perplexing criminal cases in history. I'm your host, Adam. And in today's episode, we're going to unravel the chilling story of Eric Smith, a name forever associated with the tragic and heinous crime. Join in tonight as we explore the details surrounding his case, the psychological factors that shaped his actions, and the impact it had on the community and the nation. Before we get into the show, please go and support the show at The Other People Show on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. You will find many episodes of The Dark Place, as well as Real Talk and The Other People Show. So on August 22nd, in the small town of Savona, New York, it was forever changed when 13-year-old Eric Smith committed a brutal act that shook the nation. On that fateful day, Smith lured a 4-year-old kid, a child, named Derek Roby, into a secluded wooded area where he mercilessly beat him and strangled him to death. No one would ever think that a child would do such a thing. No one suspected when this occurred that this was Eric Smith. The murder of Derek Roby sent shock waves through the community. It was a crime that struck the heart of the innocents, a small 4-year-old child, just starting out in life, brutally murdered. And the idea that a child could commit such a horrific act left everyone that knew anything about the case reeling with disbelief and horror. Now, for many years, especially at the time, the motive behind Eric Smith's crime, no one knew. But now with time and learning about it a little bit more, Eric Smith had years and years of bullying and rejection throughout that young life at 13 years old. He had very distinctive characteristics that made him stand out from the other kids. He had red hair, freckles. He had low protruding ears that were low set, glasses, and he endured relentless teasing and cruelty from his peers, which made him have an anger bubbling up inside of him. Now, Eric Smith's psychological state did play a crucial role in the events that unfolded. Unbeknownst to a lot at the time, Eric Smith had went to his stepfather and had said, I think I can't control my urges. I can't control the violence that's within. Now, he struggled with those feelings of inadequacy and anger, and his obsession with violent video games and horror movies. And it exasperated an already troubled mindset that he had. The toxic combination ultimately led to the brutal murder of young Derek Roby. The aftermath of this crime, it was filled with a mix of emotions, grief, anger, a profound sense of loss. But the community rallied together to support the Derek's family. while also grappling with the unsettling realization that a child amongst them, that could have been any one of their children, committed such a horrible act. Now there were many legal proceedings that followed, but before we get into that, you have to understand the extent of Eric Smith's brutality. So here it was a summer school, like a summer camp, and there was a little bit of pandemonium, a little bit of the mother running after the young kid, trying to get everything together, and Derek, young Derek, he he wanted to be on time. He wanted to be there on time for his school, for his summer school and his class. So it was only a block away, so his mother let him go on his own, never expecting anything to possibly happen because why would it? Derek is a smart kid. He's bright. He's well liked. He's developing a great personality at such a great age. He's mature and he's responsible. So he's allowed to go a block to get to his summer camp program. Now, as I said, Eric Smith, as we described a little bit in the opening, came from a completely different type of background. Eric Smith may have had home troubles with an overbearing and super strict stepfather. Like I said, his looks often caused ridicule and teasing. You can look up Eric Smith, and clearly see, even to this day, he pretty much looks like an older adult version of the 13-year-old that committed the heinous crime. So on this day, Derek Roby is walking to his camp, his school camp. It's a beautiful day. It's a lovely day, only a block down the street. You may, if you have children back in 1993, may have done this exact same thing. Now, Eric Smith, being out for school, was riding his bicycle around and was trying to get young Derek to take a shortcut. Go around this way, take a here's a shortcut, we can get you there quicker. It took 3 tries before Eric Smith was able to convince Derek to take the shortcut. 3 times this 13-year-old attempted to lure this kid. As he did, he ended up ramming his bike, strangling and choking Derek. Derek put up a fight, though. He was a feisty young kid. Eric Smith tried to get a plastic bag from Derek's lunchbox, probably with a sandwich in it. He tried to stuff it down his throat. But Derek wouldn't have that. Derek bit at Eric's hand, bit back at him. He wasn't going down without a fight. This little feisty 4-year-old kid who had no idea that listening to this strange older teenager, was going to lead to this, as did no one in the neighborhood. This was an unheard of thing. So, being afraid that he's not going to be able to quiet Derek Roby down, Eric Smith picks up a 24-pound rock and he throws it down on Derek's head, crushing his head. Eric goes and gets another rock, a huge rock, a boulder, throws it down on his back, on Derek's back. He then takes the Kool-Aid that's in the thermos of Derek's lunchbox and dumps the Kool-Aid all over dead Derek Roby. Eric then takes the shoes off of Derek's feet and even to this day, we don't know why, put his shoes at his left and right hands. Eric Smith leaves. He's gone for approximately 3 to 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, comes back. For reasons unknown at the time, pulls down the pants of young Derek, grabs a stick, and sodomizes him with the stick. Now, later in life, I think it was a 2014 interview, an older Eric Smith attributed that to a younger one wanted to make sure that Derek's heart had stopped beating. And the only way that he was sure that if his heart was stopped beating was to use the stick. No other explanation has been heard of. Not with the research that I've done, not with any of the psychologists or research that I've been able to find. After Derek was laying there, Eric went on about his business. Derek didn't come home from camp, and that's when they realized that he never made it to camp. A search party went out looking for Derek. Eric included was looking. Eric was included in the search party for Derek Roby, the boy he had just murdered hours before. Police investigation continues to happen, and then Eric Smith says that he has some information. He says that he saw Derek in that area around the time that it happened. He gives some descriptions about the lunch bag that he had, the lunchbox that he had, maybe the outfit that he had on. And then he starts to say, as the police begin to think, this kid really might have seen who committed this horrible crime. Let's see what he might know. So as the investigation continues, questions are being asked. Eric seems almost joyful and very excited to join in. A few days later, the funeral of Derek Roby occurs. The police investigate once again. They ask Eric Smith what had happened, what he saw. They take Eric Smith to the place that Eric said he was standing. And then one of the officers goes into the distance where Derek Roby was. And Eric Smith is not able to tell really anything much about the officer that's far away. That's where Eric said he was standing. So that can't be true. But then Eric blurts out, what if a kid did this? Do you think I did this? And then his grandparents stop the interview, stop the interrogation, so to speak. When that happens, the next morning, as they're getting ready to, I guess, do some more interrogation, Eric Smith breaks down and he tells his family what he did. Now, the legal proceedings that followed delved into complexities of the juvenile justice system. Eric Smith, at the age of 13, was charged as an adult due to the severity of these crimes, of his murder. The trial became deeply divisive. It was an emotional event, and it raised many questions about the appropriate punishment for such heinous acts committed by teens, by children. The jury found Eric Smith guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed for a juvenile, which was 9 years to life in prison. Now, this decision also ignited debates once again surrounding the juvenile justice system and rehabilitation. So you have to really think of that. Eric Smith went in after murdering an innocent boy. That's without question. That is a very tragic and sad part as well, and we all realize and know this. Even if you put your own children in this horrific situation, you would know how you would emotionally feel, or almost feel. Well, let's take a step back for just a moment, because we like to do that on the show, and think about Eric Smith. Now, Eric Smith, as we had said, he'd been bullied his entire life, his entire school life anyway. Now he is going to be entering a juvenile justice system. So he's going to be going in when he's 13, and he's going to be serving 9 years to life in prison. Now, due to the severity of the murders, led to a lot of clinical evaluations of Eric Smith. Eric was later diagnosed with intermediate explosive disorder. Now, there've never been a clear diagnosis of what triggered him to kill Derek Roby. But there was many things that were brought to light that made them come to this conclusion. There was a couple of times, one time during the interview, as they were interrogating, and I hate to use the word interrogating because they weren't sitting down with the light in front of Eric Smith. It was more like a question and answer session, because at this point you have to realize they had zero reason to believe that Eric Smith was a suspect. They had zero reason to believe that at the time. They were thinking in their mindset, this is an adult who did this, who sexually sodomized this child, but Eric Smith may be a witness. So they were looking at this as him being a potential witness, not a potential suspect or murderer. But as the psychiatrist testified, that Eric Smith was diagnosed with intermediate explosive disorder, and this is a mental condition that causes violent and unpredictable behaviors. Although it didn't persuade the jury, he did come down with that behavioral disorder. Now, there's an apology that Smith wrote, regretting what he had taken away from Derek. And this is while he was behind bars. And he wrote this apology letter, which he read out loud on public television. And this is what it said. It says, "I recognize that my actions have resulted in a terrible loss for the Roby family, and I sincerely apologize. I've tried to think about everything Derek will never have. His 16th birthday, Christmas, anytime, owning his own house, graduating, going to college, getting married, and having his first child. If I could go back in time, I would take Derek's place and bear all the pain that I've caused him. I'd switch places if it meant he'd keep living, but I can't." And that was the apology that Eric Smith gave from behind bars. Now, this case is a little bit different in a lot of the cases that we've spoke of. This is the 7th one so far. But this is the only case where the murderer has actually been paroled. Now, Eric Smith was in the juvenile facility for 3 years before being transferred to an open prison for young adults. He was later transferred to 4 more facilities before he was finally paroled. He was denied parole 10 times between 2002 and 2020. He was later granted parole in October 2021 after 21 years of incarceration. Now, you could always, and often would, sympathize, understand the family of Derek. Every 2 years, they're having to go back and relive this horrific event. And I've watched some interviews with them, and they said they're glad. They're glad it's over, because now they can get on with their life. Now, I've never had a child. I've never had one taken away in the manner that Derek Roby was taken away from his family. But I would imagine there's a hurt that's always going to linger. But is someone sitting behind bars or murdered going to bring you any kind of satisfaction or peace? That's up to the individual. But I do know that it's not going to bring Derek Roby back. Now, as I said, the jury found Eric Smith guilty, and he was released. Now, many in his community was somewhat afraid that he might try to come back to where he lived, which was a small upstate New York Mayberry type town, 900 to 1,000 people. But come to find out, when he was paroled, it was delayed a few months because he had nowhere to be released to. So he was released to his mother. He's going to have periodical, meet his parole officer, and then he's going to be moving in with his fiance, which I always do find a little bit interesting, that you're behind bars and you're able to get a fiance. I've always found that, and I know there's many people that are interested in this type of thing. It's why you're watching, and I'm doing a show of this. But going in and wanting to marry someone that's committed a crime, I don't know. I really don't know my feelings on that, because I'm not in that position. But nonetheless, the case of Eric Smith serves as a haunting reminder of the consequences of unchecked bullying and the profound impact it can have on a young person's psyche. It forces all of us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of violence and the role of social influences on vulnerable individuals. So as we honor the memory of Derek Roby, we also want to think about the consequences of bullying, because we don't want to push someone over the edge if they're close. We really don't. We don't want to do that, because there's no good that can come from that. And if you think good can come from that by bullying, you're wrong. I hate to say. Well, I don't really hate to say, but you're wrong. As that end, that brings us to the end of today's episode of The Dark Place. We hope this exploration into the case of Eric Smith has provided you with a little bit of insight into a crime that continues to provoke deep reflection and understanding.